Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. This episode is going to be something CMS titled because we're going to talk a lot about the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Brad, last week you were boots on the ground in DC. There was an event. What went down?
We missed you all last week because CMS had a big event to celebrate the first launch of applications leveraging CMS aligned networks. Amy Gleason brought together a couple hundred people in DC. Much of it was to reiterate the goals of CMS aligned networks, introduce some potential new avenues that they could push on, and then allow vendors to show what they were doing with new rails that CMS is trying to put in place. A ton of it was focused on patient access. That's something that Amy's been very transparent and consistent about. And so we saw, Clear and ID.me got a lot of screen time showing patients being able to verify their identity through those solutions, and then being able to use Tefka rails to pull down their patient history and some of the workflows that enables. Patients being able to get faster answers for care questions from AI, from being able to check in and provide a longitudinal patient record at the front desk using a QR code, some scheduling solutions, really cover the map.
Wearable technology,
Aura did demo, yes. I saw
Yep.
some. That was a particularly excellent use case or demo that they showed. One of the things that's clear is many of the major payers and EHRs were represented and consistently shown, but there also are a number of startups that are finding quick paths to market access. So overall, some of the things that I took away is Amy has been hard at work for the last 9 months trying to get people going on these. And while there's progress, there's still a long way to go to get this to tie together into a cohesive strategy. But EMS, just across the board, number of things that they're trying to do, they have really pushed their technical team to be able to support things like claims data, provider networks, patients pulling all of their medical history. Nobody expects the government to be at the forefront of those things. And I think they're showing that they can move quickly and they want to.
One question I think that is pretty prevalent in the industry, and I certainly have, is we're seeing a lot of success via the CMS health tech ecosystem for patient access and kill the clipboard, right? That's where a lot of those demos are focused. What about the other things, right? You said payers are there. Did they demo? Were they showing participation, or was it more silent, wait and watch and maybe do stuff as we get closer to the July date?
Humana had a couple demos. There was an application for senior care coordination that's AI driven, and they showed scheduling through their Medicare providers. But it was nice to see some providers trying to expose their networks and enable scheduling.
CMS is kind of firing on all cylinders, right? I mean, we have the event and the CMS health tech ecosystem continues to rip and do things, but the CMS is big and sprawling and multifaceted. Price, what else is going on?
Access, right? We just heard this week of the first participants who were approved to participate in the Access program. And this is, as we mentioned on the last podcast, one of those brilliant backronyms. Access stands for Advancing Chronic Care with Effective, Scalable Solutions. That one's good. I like that a lot. But this is one of those payment models that the CMS released earlier this year. And then they said, hey, if you want to participate in this new program, it's a payment model whereby we say, hey, we will give you payments if your organization participates in Access and proves outcomes with members that are being cared for by traditional Medicare. So they're outcome aligned payments. This isn't like, we'll give you a payment if you give Price an Aura ring, or we'll give you a payment if you see Price for an encounter. It's we will give you a payment if you can prove to us that Price's blood pressure was X and has fallen to Y. They're trying to incentivize the fact that, especially with the proliferation of these tools that can automate a lot, like AI, or these tools that are literally in the hands of people, if everyone can care for themselves, reduce the burden on a provider, it might take 5 minutes to look over these numbers, but really like Aura or Whoop, these companies can start participating in a way where they say, I'm going to sign up as a Medicare Part B provider in some form or fashion. And I don't think actually Aura was even in the initial list of accepted applicants. But the point here is that the groups who have been accepted are planning to use distribution of technology to relieve the burden that is otherwise centralized on one provider to care for 1,000 people who are all over 65 and trying to be cheap, in terms of healthcare costs. So that was exciting from this week, but I didn't go much deeper. What did you all hear?
Well, just another piece of color is like a month ago, weeks ago, when they released the financials, all of this, all this controversy almost of like, how could it be so low? It's so low. But like that is really freaking cool because if it works, even if it works for one or two of these groups, then we've proven something. That we've proven finally that we don't need to take status quo pricing or like slightly adjusted pricing, but like do something extremely ambitious and achieve better outcomes. And the full bar for success is like, oh, it has to math out to be what it is today. It's like, no, no, no. The CMS is saying this is an experiment because that's what CMMI does best. Experiments, a lot of times failures, but sometimes successes. And this one in particular is very ambitious by saying we're going to take a big old swing at this in ways we haven't before. So I get why people are not happy that it doesn't like pattern match prior structures they have on the employer market or with the CMS and other types of programs. But that's why we're doing it this way. And if it doesn't math out, you don't want to take that cut. You don't want to take that risk. Godspeed. Go some different direction. Do what's being done today. But if you do and you can make it work, well, you've just changed healthcare maybe.
We have to have an optimist on this podcast, so I'm nominating Brendan for that. There are some things about this that are really cool, right? We called out the usage of nationwide rails, HIEs, or TEFCA for reporting this data back. Genuinely cool. I'm not going to make everybody sit through my story about trying to run a HbA1c testing program with one of the largest payers in the country, and they wanted CPT codes, but CPT2 codes, but they couldn't actually ingest those codes, and so they knew that they were getting HbA1c tests, but not what the actual risk of their patient population is, right?
I think you're making us sit through the story.
No, well, it's much longer. It's much longer. We are going to get some data about these patients, but I think there are difficulties of CMS trying to be the one to drive innovation models, in part because of who the patient population is. I've tried to get my parents to use Apple Watches, and they know how to put it on the wrist, but they're not setting up any health monitoring. There are incentives to enroll specific types of patients, which is probably a really small percentage of the patient population. And if you enroll a patient into the program and your cohort is non-compliant or you're not seeing the outcomes, 50% of your payments are being held till the end of the year. And there's a very strong incentive for those providers to just pull out of the program. It's probably not going to be one of these extremes, but I think we could see year 2 of access being barren and not having a whole lot of people who want to participate in it. Because there's too much uncertainty about the payments. And then the question is, did we actually get enough data to say this is an effective type of program for us to run? Or we find that digital health providers are really good at lemon dropping. They're very good at selecting the patients that know how to use technology, that are going to be very compliant. And we see reductions in HbA1c, in depression and anxiety, in MSK pain scores, which make the model seem way more effective than if it were rolled out to a larger population, which is not to say we shouldn't be doing these things. CMS has taken a lot of bets right now, and I want to see access succeed. I am more on the pessimistic side here than Brendan is.
Well, we're turning on the Brendan Keeler patented probability market. What is it called?
Kalashi?
Poly market?
We're gonna poly market this bitch and do it at like 60% to start. So if you want in, let us know because that's what we're gonna monetize and pay for access. Actually,
that's how we're funding the podcast.
Yeah,
that's right.
The not podcast.
We're gonna reduce everyone's hypertension, increase gambling addiction. That's the goal.
We're not gonna go down that rabbit hole because I have a lot to say about bringing back one of the oldest sins of mankind.
Speaking of sins, have you heard about the Pope? Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Price.
Speaking of the CMS being so busy, Brandon wrote a slew of amazing articles, I thought, regarding 0062. CMS 0062 is the newest proposed rule from the CMS. Tell us a little bit about that, Brendan. Particularly, I love that multiple people have called out that it sort of came out under the guise of like a real-time prescription benefits, but it has way more than that in it. So what's on the menu?
Yeah, it's fun because we just had a CMS rule 3 weeks ago, right? 053, the claims attachments. So it's like, oh, they must be good for a minute. But no, no, no. 062. It's been waiting in the wings for almost a year. It's been chilling with OMB, right, since spring 2025 unified agenda. OMB being part of the agency that reviews rules to make sure they're compliant and they stitch together right, and no one's going to sue them. It sat around for a year, which is a long time, but Trump admin was getting going. There was a deregulatory order, right, from Trump that meant that no new regulation. This is new regulation. But they got it through now. And in the interim, the person really pushing it from the CMS side, Alex Muggy, went to work for Oracle. And so this rule, you're kind of squinting at it. It was coming, the last remaining bit, it seemed like, from 9115, the CMS patient access rule, which added the ability to pull claims data from payers, right? This is the first rule that regulated payers to say, hey, add interoperability, sort of clinical interoperability. And then we had 0057, the prior auth rule, 2024 said, okay, now we're going to do payer data exchange. We're going to do payer to provider data exchange. We're going to do prior authorization for medical procedures. It's all FHIR based, right? And so then the last remaining thing is like, well, what are we going to do about drugs? What are we going to do about medications? And so this rule on paper was just going to be a little tiny rule saying, here's what we're doing about drugs. But no, 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 no. This is a big one. This is bigger than 0053. It compounds and expands and really takes some big cuts, layering on top of the prior auth rule of 2024. And in some ways contradicts the rule we saw only 3 weeks ago.
Quick reminder, all of these rules, because they're written by the CMS, really just apply to payers who are taking on risk from the CMS, aka Medicare Advantage, and they would apply to providers who want full reimbursement or MIPS incentives and things like that from the CMS, right? So we're still talking about a massive market shifting trend, but affecting 40% of payments or encounters or however you want to split it down the middle. Is that right?
More specific, I mean, only small parts of this rule even touch providers, right? The ADT notifications of 9115 touch providers. Most of it, almost all of it is CMS plans, Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, ACA, but only parts of ACA, because if it's state run or state based exchanges, it can't be, the same regulatory hooks aren't in there. And so that ends up being 48, 49% of insured Americans, but certainly not all the employer-based plans, certainly not all the even federal plans, right? FEHB, not regulated by this because the CMS doesn't have authority. You're like, wow, we're going to have electronic prior authorization everywhere. It's like, well, will we? Maybe not. But it's really, really hard to regulate employer-based plans in any capacity because of ERISA, kind of making them immune in many ways to regulation or requiring what's called tri-agency coordination between the Department of Labor and CMS and others.
The hope here is that if they have to make this change for, a TPA who can do this for the federal government can also expose it to their employers, fingers crossed.
Okay.
Yeah, but
I'm checking off TPA and tri-agency something on my bingo card.
I mean, you would assume that that'd be the case, but if you actually think about payers, they're like the Russian dolls, right? What are those called? Like, you pull them back and there's just another layer and another layer, and they have 15 different systems, and they acquired their employer plans they acquired 5 years ago and have totally different systems than their Medicaid plans, which have totally different systems. And so you wire it up for just the CMS plans, and you're not technically set up to communicate and do those things with all the systems they might use for employer-based.
Remember when I was talking about CPT2 codes earlier?
Full circle.
But Galaxy brain.
Bryce, when you were reading it, did any of the articles or topics stick out to you?
Oh gosh, a lot of it did. I was basically slacking you the entire time because I was so excited by it. But just from a broad strokes perspective, you were just saying a lot of this doesn't really affect providers. For the majority of my health IT career, it's like we regulate EHRs, open up EHRs, and still today people love to be mad about or excited about what an EHR can or cannot execute on as it pertains to interoperability and what's regulated. But I love to see this turn and focus towards payers for a lot of different reasons. From my perspective, payers have much, much less detailed clinical information about patients, about their members, than the actual acute care facility that I spent 10 days in, right? Like Hopkins EHR is going to have a lot more provider notes, vitals. They're going to have all my lab results. Who was a nurse working when I was in the middle of the night or something like that. But payers are the one ultimately carrying the risk for each of these patients or members, as they would call them, and therefore have this nice, especially if they just received claims, they have this nice sort of linear story to tell about, at least for anything that needed to be reimbursed by insurance, what service was provided, for what reason, what diagnosis, right? And that information starts to piece together, the bones of a very clear clinical story that my psychiatrist and my endocrinologist and my PCP each only have a third of. And then you layer on the fact that since they are holding the purse strings and they are the one who decides when and why you would be allowed to get an MRI through utilization management, prior authorization, I do like to see that the CMS is acknowledging these folks need to be as involved in patient care and turning the inflection point of healthcare costs in the other direction, because they see it all. Even if they're not getting detailed information, they're trying to. They're getting more and more through these evolving utilities that we have coming into place, like the prior authorization rule and Da Vinci exchanges, or eventually TEFCA will support operations. Maybe you're not an optimist on that one, Brendan. But I thought it was sweet to see
We'll
them.
figure it out somehow. We'll figure it out
Yeah,
somehow.
yeah. Turning the focus to payers was exciting for me.
One of the RFIs in there was to certify payer technology. And that was a big deal because that was proposed last administration in HTI2. And then we said, no, all the ideas in HTI2, that is forbidden, right? Like that is gone. We're wiping away most of it. And then we see a lot of them sneaking back up into HTI5, probably more in HTI6 in terms of fire subscriptions, which were proposed in HTI2. And here we see the proposal to expand the certification criteria to potentially hit other types of entities beyond certified health IT EHR type tech for providers to payers. There's a lot of implications, but yeah, are you for or against? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
I know we talked about payers being Russian nesting dolls. This administration has focused, and I guess last administration has focused a lot on drug pricing. The payers own PBMs. Maybe the answer to this is they acquired them and it's a completely different tech stack. But one of the things that stuck out to me, because I really haven't spent much time on the payer side at all, is the different exchange methods between the plans and the PBMs with providers. One of the places that honestly I got stuck reading the pieces is understanding why there are such different communication rails between PBM, payer, and provider. And I don't know if either of you can speak to that for other people who sort of got lost in the sauce reading Health API Guy.
They're different because they're different entities. They just do different things and interact with different types of, they interact with pharmacies instead of with providers, and so as you have different business types, different software emerges to support them. And just because organizations are vertically integrated and just purchase conglomerate style, all these other types, doesn't mean that suddenly their software is homogenous. Quite the opposite. It takes, as they become very conglomerate is not really an adjective, but we're going to make it one. Then they hit the limits of what commercial off-the-shelf software can provide, and they need to glue together disparate software, which doesn't always go well, which is quite difficult. And so you see integration platforms as a service, you see Redoxes in the provider space, you see Flume Health, I think, is in the payer space to stitch things together, Rhapsody. And that's just when you've hit the boundaries of what there being enough of the type of entity that you are with all the business needs where you can have one piece of software. And we're lucky, or not lucky, depending on your view, that in the provider side, the systems of record have developed to encompass a ton of the functionality that business type needs. But that's not the case in every industry.
And so do you expect that Da Vinci, NCPDP, those standards will continue to exist in a health IT regulated, like the payer world falls under regulated health IT?
That would be to cement it in and also turn the makers of payer technology into potential information blockers. Right, they could be actors under the information blocking statute. And so I think we're going to see a ton of payers who make tech and payer technology vendors comment on this rule and say, no way in hell, do not do that. We'll do anything else. You want us to submit to the CMS directly? We'll do it,
Do I want them to have to do it? Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'm not a big fan of creating more regulation, but I am a big fan of playing whack-a-mole with whoever's, dominating the market or driving up costs, or if we're going to force the provider side of this equation to be so compliant and own so much of the cost of care, like total cost of care, and own so much of the burden, the administrative burden of utilization management. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, I would love to see the other systems that are deciding when and why, and they seem like a total black box. I could go on for 20 minutes right now about Cigna and how they never reimbursed me appropriately. Well, my wife appropriately for her perfectly healthy home birth. So yeah, I'm big, shaking my fists like you're gonna play ball the way that the rest of us want you to. Just because you have the most money right now doesn't mean that you get to call the shots on what technology gets used and how. And to Brennan's point, I mean, it would be a huge regulatory burden on them because their systems are so fragmented. You know, one payer could really be 25 Medicaid plans that have been bought over the last 10 years and shoved under one name, and they all have 15 different claims adjudication systems. But damn it, I want people working together, and I don't really care. I don't really give a damn about capitalism when it comes to that. So sorry, Cat McDavid or whoever.
Hey, listen, if it puts them under information blocking, then, Cigna, Epic, John Deere, they're all in their crosshairs. Uh, I'm for it. Yeah. So many of the entrenched players they did not capture market share purely through ingenuity. So much of it was driven by regulatory capture already. This feels like it is evening the playing field and introducing players who can drive down costs. Let's go back to access. It's been impossible for or Whoop to find a way in to, if they truly think that they can reduce chronic care costs. Great, let's give them a path in. So now I guess I'm pro access.
Let me flip this back to you, Brendan. Take out your crystal ball. There's no chance we're going to start certifying payer technology as a result of this proposed rule, right? What do you think?
Correct. This is just an RFI, right? So in the rule, there are requests for information to inform
Okay.
future rules. That was one interesting one. There was one about step therapy. So step therapy being, whether that could transfer between payers if you're on these regimens and you don't have to go restart and change things over. And so that would be a killer use case for the payer data exchange if that's able to be enabled through there. And then
That would be a killer use case if we could even get it off the ground in
that's
a
right.
meaningful way at all.
That's
Keep
right.
going.
And then ADT notifications, I think they're revisiting what they've done before and saying, is this good enough in terms of where we need to be with a nationwide capability for ADT notifications? So yeah, we had the rule itself that's proposed. It says use NCPDP here, get rid of X12, use fire Da Vinci, which contradicts in some ways that 0053 rule only a couple weeks ago. And that's because this rule comes from different parts of the CMS. So much like payers are Russian dolls with many parts. So is the CMS, right? The CMS has different groups with different mandates, different authority, and different prerogatives. And so Amy Gleason's group, the CMS Health Tech ecosystem, very different than the group that owns the HIPAA administrative standards, which released the 005 rule a couple weeks ago that chose to go and promote X12 as the standard there. And here we see the HIIG, this interoperability group that started under Seema Verma in the first Trump admin and grew into this mandate of promoting interoperability for payers. They're very pro fire, as we can see, and they're saying actually not just let's go do more fire. They're actually saying let's take something that's X12 prior authorization, let's make it full fire. You can create succession level subplots of what's going on in the CMS, or it could just be, they're copacetic and they just agreed to do a little swap there. Who knows?
Who knows? We'll have to get the dirty deets from someone. Reach out to us if you were listening to any of those crazy conversations about X12 and fire.
Brad, you mentioned randomly John Deere. What was that all about?
Well, I have to have some random things to text you about late at night, right? So, and I come from the great land of farming, Wisconsin. A John Deere article about the right to repair came across a feed of mine Sunday, maybe. And I'd been seeing stories about John Deere and them forcing farmers to use their dealerships for any sort of maintenance. I wouldn't say I've been tightly following it, but huge decision, basically forcing John Deere to open up their drivers. I don't know that they have to open source anything, but they have to allow third parties to do repairs on the machinery, which is probably a huge hit to their business, but a boon for people who have bought this machinery and then just been screwed when it broke down in the middle of a field. And it felt like it was a very natural corollary to information blocking in our industry and also used car dealerships. But yeah,
I
threw
mean,
it over
right.
the fence to see whether or not it said anything to you.
I was like, rock solid. This is, I mean, I have a antitrust and information blocking presentation that I give, and in there, like, oh, well, there's this parallel to this right to repair movement that is out there. So you nailed it.
Have I seen this?
No, I don't think you've seen it, which
Oh,
is
okay.
crazy. I went back and looked, but totally is the ability to use, share diagnostics from the software of John Deere with independent repair men and women was not enabled, right? You had to go get the certified John Deere technician. And so that sort of lock-in occurs in software of all varieties, right? You have it with like diabetes devices that people have to like jailbreak to even just go and do like fix it themselves or understand their data. And you certainly have it in software of all kinds, of all verticals, for all systems of record where they lock it in to try and maintain a platform advantage. And they sometimes do it for good reasons, security or privacy, but oftentimes for self-serving reasons. And so tremendous win in terms of antitrust and against John Deere and enforcing openness for our farmers as they have many other burdens on them at this time. And just a great win for interoperability that we hope to see replicated, that hope to see open ecosystems promoted to allow for co-opetition, cheaper prices for consumers and users of different devices. So yeah,
I
send more over my desk of that variety.
Did you actually find the reporting? Like, would this apply to other manufacturers like a Caterpillar, or was John Deere just so egregious in their behavior that they got singled out?
John Deere was so egregious in their behavior that people were going like off market to go buy 40-year-old tractors, so that didn't have the lock
Mm,
in. So like, that's like
you got to get that
those-
jailbroken tractor like that,
Promote market distortion.
Okay.
but let's go broader. Let's go. We just saw another ecosystem changing dramatically. Did any of you read today's article about Salesforce?
I saw enough to know what's going on. When Brendan starts talking about headless software, he's getting excited. Doesn't matter what industry it's in.
We're making a little stretch here, but now that anybody can have access to John Deere diagnostics, is the John Deere tractor not going headless?
Com. So we did see Salesforce make this announcement about their Agentforce platform where they said, you don't have to use our UI. We're now going to realize we have to open up. We have to be really open and headless with our CRM. And you can connect at the UI layer and integrate, whatever custom components and visuals you want. You can integrate your agents to have them running over our software via RPA or APIs or MCP, you name it. We did it all. And at first blush, you're like, whoa, wait, that is awesome. But let's make no mistake. Mark Benioff likes money just as much as anyone else. And so he is
Probably
not
more.
benevolent. He's got to keep that tower going. And so he's not benevolent. It's just benevolent altruism. It is because systems of record see the writing on the wall and see that I can charge you a per seat license and make X per seat, or I can charge you a per token, per action agent pricing.
Hmm.
And then if I make your business successful, that line is exponentially higher over time than the per seat licensing. And so the shift is to make more money. The shift is to enable these businesses to be successful for sure, but to capture the value that's coming from agents manipulating systems of record. Because if they don't provide that tooling, which Salesforce now has, then people are just going to run roughshod over it with computer use and computer vision. And guys, we see it all the time in terms of browser-based EHRs already getting
Uh-huh.
scraped up the wazoo. And so I have to think, I don't know about you, that EHRs and other systems of record are going to follow suit. They're going to build these ecosystems to do the same thing.
Or at least like in their policies and procedures, they have to say, robotic process automation or agentic AI is permissive only if you have special user accounts that are for these robots, which, maintain certain security points and maybe get charged at a different licensure level, right? Like, because to Brennan's point, it's one thing to say every nurse license costs this much. Well, what if you have a nurse that does 10 times as much work 24/7 because really it's just Claude in the background or something? Well, you got to change the pricing model a little bit, and that's okay. I still want to see these groups adapt to realize so much of my value has traditionally been tied up in how the user interacts with sort of the back end that they don't see. And now it's like everyone needs to realize the front end is becoming commoditized. I am starting to be in my car all the time and thinking, I don't want Google to search things. My son's asking me how to do the glitch in Pokemon Blue so I can duplicate his rare candies. And I just want to be like, hey, Claude, how do you do this? I don't even want to interact with software, really. I want to think that I'm just saying a question out loud and getting an answer in response. And that's what people are going to continually want from their Salesforce, from their EHR, from their tractors. They don't want to have to go to, the brand new platinum John Deere dealership to get, a diagnosis that says your spark plug's out. They're like, let me do it. All of these different industries sort of dance to the same beat here of like, we're gonna have to change the way that we imagine humans and software interacting. And there will be fewer pinch points, like you have to go to Humana to ask permission for this MRI, or you have to go to John Deere to figure out what's wrong, or you have to open up your phone to ask a question. There's going to be fewer of those. And the more the data is opened up, the more the databases are opened up, the easier they are to interact with. I mean, everything has to change, from a commercial perspective to support that.
There's just a lot of businesses that are the way that they were able to price isn't necessarily driving value. Nilay Patel from The Verge talks about the DoorDash problem all the time. Parts of the business of getting delivery drivers or drivers on the road to do these tasks is incredibly complicated. Uber and Lyft have to incentivize people. Sometimes they take a loss on the trip just so that they know that they have enough drivers on the road. The task of what food is available down the street at every single restaurant is a fairly solved problem. And if DoorDash's value of charging a management fee is that they created that database, well, LLMs are just, they can use it for now, but it's a fairly easy service to replicate. Whereas you have something, the systems of record, I think, are in a very strong place. Like the restaurant industry, Toast or Square are in operations of that business. They're doing something, they're helping that business be more effective. I think for tools like Salesforce or EHRs, the reason to open up is if they are embedded enough in driving the like P&L of that business, they're not going anywhere. And there are probably more ways for them to make money. They'll have a ton of seats, they'll have a bunch of agents. Salesforce moving on this is only going to make it harder for upstarts in the industry who are saying, like, we're an agent first CRM to break through. We can obviously watch their earnings and they'll probably go up. But more than anything, a lot of these major players opening up, they are just making it harder for anybody to come in and introduce a competing piece of software and helping their customers who are already entrenched in whatever industry they are stay there, which is, I'm not saying that's bad. And this cycle is, it may look like Salesforce is in trouble or Epic might be in trouble, but the reality is the ecosystem in which they play, the way that the hospital system knows their local population, they know their local politicians, they know the ordinances, they're participating with employers in that area. That is value that extends beyond the use of Epic, but they have designed Epic to help them more deeply integrate with those systems.
But you're saying that the skeleton of all these systems is already customized. Like,
Yeah.
who cares what it
And
looks like? Put makeup on
right,
it.
like it's great for them.
Yeah.
In the short
Yeah.
term, I don't know, Salesforce sells 20% less seats, but the reality is there's not some CRM that four dudes in their garage are building today that suddenly all of the Fortune 500 companies are going to decide, let me dump decades and
Yeah.
decades of data.
I do want to just to play foil, and that's optimism, maybe be pessimism here. How does this become like all the cable companies running to build a streamer during the pandemic, right? Like, could it be something like that where now in retrospect, you're like, how dumb were you? You just gave away your business model. Well, if you are allowing it and becoming open and your data scheme is open and you are giving away the user interface layer, then at a certain point, it is trivial to vibe code a replacement for software when you intrinsically understand workflows and data
Well,
concepts.
that's the part that's different. What is the workflow for me consuming content? I pick up my remote and I click around. What is the barrier to entry in B2B software is just so much higher than building a streamer. They bought a shitload of content and they made it really easy to access.
I just meant less that it will be exactly like that, and more that if this action of all these systems of record saying, oh yeah, we're going to monetize by opening up and giving away the layer, it could look as dumb as them all moving and creating a streamer rather than using the bundle on cable. And I think that that reality is because there's only three assets to SaaS, right? There's the user interface IP, there's the data and database layer IP, I guess four assets, between the data layer as data and also the structure. And then the middle layer being workflow, the business logic. And the more you give up of them, the less you actually have that is unique to you. And right now I'm hearing Salesforce giving away two or three or four of those layers that give a lot. It's a lot of trust that only a legal agreement is in between an upstart and their disruption. And so that's just something to think about. I don't know if I believe it. I don't have conviction there. I actually think everything you said is probably how I view the world and what I've written before. Some fraction of what might be possible here in the multiverse is disruption.
A call sheet that's for this podcast.
Yeah, 5%, 5%.
They're opening all of this up, and they've got an MCP layer and an API layer, and but each of those they're not opening up the database layer. They're opening up some abstraction of the business logic's interaction with the database layer. So you don't know really necessarily like which columns you're writing to and when and how and what the CRUD logic and things like that is. If you're using an MCP call, it's just kind of like, and then on the back end, like, yeah, on the front end, I kind of got to talk to an LLM instead, or an agent did this. But then on the back end, these companies are purposefully abstracting plenty of their secret sauce for us.
Ultimately, is it openness, building dependency with your surrounding ecosystem, or is it allowing one of them to slide the knife in easier? Like we shall see, but there's an argument to be made either way.
Yeah, let's bet on
Well,
it.
let's okay. What's the name of our betting site be? Since that's all, the American economy is only
Oh
healthcare
gosh.
and gambling now. Anyway, on that very positive note, I think we've got to wrap. Everyone have a great week or weekend whenever you're listening to this. See ya.
Yeah.